The small apartment above the bakery always smelled of warm bread and coffee. Every evening, when the street outside grew quiet, a soft sound of piano would rise from the room at the end of the hall. It wasn't the sound of a grand piano or a fancy stage instrument. It was old, a little out of tune, and missing one black key that had fallen off years ago. But still, the girl who played it treated it like her best friend. She sat there every night, her thin fingers moving gently over the keys, her head slightly bent as if she was afraid to disturb the silence. Her name was Elena, a quiet girl in her early 20s who never liked attention. Most people in her life didn't even know she could play. When she was a child, Elena had once seen a man playing a piano in a park. She remembered how the notes had filled the air, how the man had smiled even though no one was watching. That day, something inside her woke up. She came home and told her mother she wanted to learn to play too. But lessons were too expensive and her parents couldn't afford them. Still, Elena didn't give up. When she was 12, she found an old keyboard that someone had thrown away near the trash bins behind the building. Some keys didn't work, but she carried it home as if it were treasure. From then on, she learned by herself. She listened to songs, watched videos on her old phone, and tried to copy what she heard. Years passed, and her fingers learned to speak the language of music. But outside that little room, no one seemed to notice. Her parents loved her, but they were practical people. Her father worked long hours at a warehouse, and her mother baked bread for the shop downstairs. They often worried about money and bills. To them, music felt like a dream they couldn't afford. "Elena, you play beautifully," her mother once said, "but dreams don't fill empty plates." Elena had smiled softly and nodded, even though those words hurt a little. She understood. Life was hard. Still, when the house went quiet at night, she always found her way back to the piano. It was the only place where her heart felt understood. During the day, Elena worked at a small cafe a few streets away. She wore a simple uniform, tied her hair back, and spent most of her time cleaning tables or taking orders. The cafe was always busy, filled with noise and laughter. People came and went, but no one ever looked at her for more than a moment. Sometimes, when she had a few seconds alone behind the counter, she would hum softly to herself. Little pieces of melodies that came from nowhere. One afternoon, an old man who visited the cafe often noticed her humming. He was a retired music teacher who spent his days reading newspapers and drinking black coffee. "You have a musical ear," he said kindly one day. "Do you play something?" Elena froze for a moment. She didn't like to talk about herself. "Just a little," she said quietly. He smiled. "Don't stop. Even if no one listens, music always finds someone who needs it." His words stayed with her, though she didn't say anything back. That evening, she played longer than usual, as if those words had given her permission to believe in herself again. But life had its way of reminding her of limits. The rent was always late. The piano needed repair, and her fingers sometimes ached from work. The keys stuck often, and sometimes the pedal squeaked so loudly she had to stop playing. Still, she never complained. Instead, she'd place her hand over the broken keys and whisper, "It's okay. We'll manage." One night, when the wind was strong and the streets were empty, Elena sat by the window after finishing her shift. The lights of the bakery below had turned off, and the smell of fresh bread still lingered in the air. She looked at her hands, rough from cleaning tables and washing dishes. Then she looked at the piano, standing silently in the corner, waiting. For a long moment, she didn't move. She thought about how everyone around her seemed to be moving forward. Friends finding better jobs, people getting married, others traveling or studying. She felt stuck in the same place, like a note that never changes. Still, something inside her whispered, "Play." So she did. She sat down and began to play a slow tune she had made up weeks ago. The sound was uneven at first, but as she closed her eyes, it grew softer, deeper. Every note felt like a word she could never say aloud. She played about loneliness, about hope, about her mother's tired eyes and her father's rough hands. When she finished, there was silence again. But it wasn't the cold kind of silence she used to fear. It felt peaceful, like the world was listening even if no one else was there. She didn't know it then, but that quiet night was the beginning of something much bigger. The next few days went by as usual. The cafe was busy, the city noisy, and Elena continued to live quietly in her small world. But inside her, something had changed. The music she played that night kept echoing in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear it. Soft, imperfect yet deeply hers. Sometimes she wondered what it would feel like if other people heard it too. Would they feel what she felt? Would they understand the story behind each note? Then she would shake her head and smile. Who would listen? She'd whisper to herself. She was just a girl in a small apartment with an old piano. Her parents didn't ask much about her music anymore. They had learned that she wouldn't stop playing no matter what. And deep down, they admired her persistence, even if they didn't always say it. Her mother would sometimes leave a plate of food by the piano when Elena forgot to eat, smiling softly to herself as she watched her daughter's hands dance on the keys. The sound of the piano had become part of the home, a gentle reminder that beauty could exist even in a life full of struggle. But outside those walls, Elena remained invisible. When people passed her on the street, they saw only a quiet girl carrying a small bag, her shoulders slightly bent, eyes always down. No one guessed that behind that calm face lived a storm of melodies waiting to be heard. One Sunday afternoon, after closing the cafe, Elena decided to walk by the river. The sun was setting, turning the sky orange and pink. She sat on a bench and watched the water move. There was a street performer nearby playing a violin. People stopped to listen. Some threw coins, others smiled and took videos. Elena watched him, and for the first time she felt something strange. Not jealousy, but a kind of ache. She didn't want fame or applause. She just wanted her music to reach someone, even one person, the way that man in the park had once reached her when she was a child. That evening, she went home and played again. This time she tried something new, mixing the tune she had written before with a few fresh notes. It wasn't a song yet, just a feeling taking shape, but it was real. She played until her fingers hurt, then stopped and listened to the echo fade into the night. She smiled, quietly proud. Maybe someday, she thought, someone would hear it. Maybe not, but for now the sound was enough. The bakery downstairs opened early the next morning, and the smell of bread once again filled the hallway. Ellen awoke to the soft noise of her mother working, the rhythm of the oven door, the rustle of paper bags. Life continued just as before, ordinary, quiet, steady. But in that same small room, an old piano stood ready, and a girl with big dreams sat before it. She didn't know that the music she played alone in the dark would one day travel farther than she ever could imagine. For now, all she knew was this. When her fingers touched the keys, the world felt a little less heavy, and her heart, for a while, felt light enough to dream. The next few weeks passed quietly. The rhythm of Elena's life stayed the same. Work at the cafe in the morning, chores in the afternoon, and piano at night. She didn't talk much to anyone. Her world was small but peaceful in its own way. Yet inside her heart, something had started to change. She began to hear music everywhere she went. In the sound of rain hitting the window, in the clinking of cups at the cafe, even in the hum of the fridge at home. Every sound seemed to whisper a melody to her. Sometimes she would pause in the middle of work, wipe her hands on her apron, and hum a tune that had suddenly come to her mind. Her co-workers laughed softly when they caught her doing it. "You're always in your own world," one of them teased kindly. Elena smiled shyly and went back to work, but inside she didn't mind. Her world, her quiet musical world, was the only place where she felt free. Still, there were days when she felt small, like she didn't belong anywhere. She often walked past music schools and saw students carrying their instruments with confidence, talking about concerts and lessons. She would stop for a moment and listen from outside the gate, trying to catch a bit of what they played. Then she'd walk away quickly before anyone noticed her. She didn't envy them. She just wished she had the same courage, the courage to show her music to others without fear of being laughed at. At the cafe, the old music teacher still came in almost every day. He always sat at the same corner table by the window. When things were slow, Elena would sometimes bring him his coffee and stay for a short chat. He liked to talk about his younger days, about the time when he taught children who dreamed of becoming great musicians. "You know," he said one afternoon, stirring his coffee slowly, "talent is not always found in big halls or music schools. Sometimes it hides in small places, like this cafe." Elena looked down, pretending not to understand what he meant. But she could feel her cheeks warm. He smiled knowingly and didn't press further. A few days later, as she cleaned the counter, he left a small folded piece of paper next to the tip jar. When she opened it later, it read, Don't be afraid to let people hear what you feel. That's what music is for. She kept that note in her bag, and sometimes when she doubted herself, she'd take it out and read it again. But life wasn't easy. Her family's money problems continued to grow. The bakery's business was slow, and her father had been working extra shifts to cover the bills. The stress showed on their faces. Her mother often came home tired, wiping sweat from her forehead, and Elena could see how much they were struggling to keep everything together. That winter was especially hard. The heater broke down and they had to wrap themselves in old blankets to stay warm. One night, Elena found her mother sitting quietly at the kitchen table, looking at a pile of unpaid bills. She didn't say anything, but Elena could see her mother's eyes were wet. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, staring at the piano in the corner. The moonlight fell across the keys and something in her heart tightened. For years, music had been her escape, something she did for herself. But now, for the first time, she wanted to create something for someone else. She moved to the piano, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keys. Slowly, she began to play. The melody started as a whisper, soft, gentle, like a mother's hands brushing a child's hair. Then it grew deeper, carrying sadness and love all at once. She didn't think about notes or rhythm. She just played what she felt. Hours passed without her noticing. When she finally stopped, her cheeks were wet, though she hadn't realized she'd been crying. The tune she had created was simple, but every note felt honest. She decided to name it, "For You, Mama." For the first time in her life, Elena felt she had written something that truly belonged to her. It wasn't perfect, but it carried her heart in it. She recorded it on her old phone just so she wouldn't forget the melody. The sound quality was poor. There was static and sometimes the keys clanked, but the emotion was clear. She listened to it again and again, and every time she felt something deep inside her stir. The next evening, while scrolling through her phone before bed, she came across a small online music forum. People there shared their own songs, covers, and recordings. Most of them were just ordinary people like her, not professionals. Just people who loved music. On a sudden impulse, she clicked upload. Her hands trembled as she chose the file of "For You, Mama." She didn't even write her full name. She simply typed, "A small piece I wrote for my mother." Then she put her phone away and went to sleep. She didn't expect anything to happen. In fact, by morning, she had already forgotten about it. She woke up late, rushed to work, and the day went on as usual. But when she finally came home that evening and checked her phone, she froze. Her post had hundreds of comments. People were sharing it, reposting it, writing about how it made them cry. Some said it reminded them of their own mothers. Others said it helped them calm down during a hard day. The little video, recorded on her old phone, full of small mistakes, had somehow reached thousands of strangers overnight. Elena stared at the screen in disbelief. Her heart raced as she scrolled through the messages. "Who played this?" one comment asked. "I've never heard something so simple yet so powerful." Another said, "This song feels like a hug." She couldn't believe it. Her song, something she made in the quiet of her room out of pure emotion, was touching people she had never met. But instead of excitement, she felt nervous. Her hands shook. What if people found out who she was? What if they expected her to be better than she really was? She wasn't a real musician, just a girl with a second-hand piano and a dream. For a few days, she avoided checking the forum, but messages kept coming. Someone even made a video with her music playing in the background, and it started to go viral on other platforms too. At work, the old teacher noticed she seemed distracted. "Something's on your mind," he said with a gentle smile. Elena hesitated. "It's nothing," she murmured. He looked at her for a moment, then said, "You know, when music touches hearts, it's no longer just yours. It becomes part of the world. Don't hide from it." That night, she thought about his words as she sat by the piano. The light flickered softly in the room. She realized that maybe this was her moment, the one she had always dreamed of but never believed could happen. People had finally heard her. She didn't know what the future would bring. Maybe the attention would fade in a few days. Maybe no one would remember her name. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time, her music had reached beyond the walls of her small home. Her mother didn't know anything about it yet. Elena decided to keep it a secret for now. She wanted to tell her only when she was sure it was real. Before going to sleep, she listened to her song again. The same soft melody filled the room. She smiled and whispered to herself, "You see, Mama? I finally found a way for the world to hear you too." As she lay down that night, she didn't feel invisible anymore. She didn't know where this road would lead, but deep inside she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Elena woke up the next morning to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. She rubbed her eyes, half asleep, thinking it was just messages from her friends or work. But when she unlocked the screen, her breath caught. Notifications filled the screen, hundreds of them. The small video she had uploaded, the one she thought no one would notice, had exploded overnight. People from all over the world were commenting, sharing, and reposting it. Some wrote long messages about how it made them cry, how it reminded them of someone they had lost, how it felt too real. Others said they had been listening to it on repeat all night. Someone even made an animation using her music in the background. She sat on the edge of her bed, frozen. For a long moment, she couldn't even smile. It was too much to take in. Her quiet little melody, played in a dark room on an old piano, had found its way into the hearts of thousands of strangers. Her first reaction wasn't excitement. It was fear. She wasn't ready for attention. She didn't even think she deserved it. She kept wondering if people would still love the song if they saw who she really was. A shy girl from a small apartment, working in a cafe with no training, no fancy equipment, and no confidence. At breakfast, her mother noticed she was unusually quiet. "Is something wrong?" she asked, pouring tea. Elena hesitated, then shook her head. "No, just tired." She wasn't ready to tell her family yet, not until she understood what was happening. On her way to work, she listened to the recording again through her headphones. It still didn't feel real. The same soft notes that had once filled her lonely nights were now echoing through other people's homes, their cars, their hearts. At the cafe, she couldn't focus. She dropped a spoon, forgot an order, and kept checking her phone when no one was watching. By the end of her shift, she had received a message from a small music channel asking if they could share her song and credit her name. Her hands shook as she typed a reply. "Yes, thank you." That night she sat at the piano again. She looked at the old keys, some chipped, some faded, and smiled. "You did it," she whispered to the piano, half laughing. But when she tried to play something new, she froze. For the first time, she was aware that people were listening. It wasn't just her anymore. She started worrying about what others would think. What if her next song wasn't as good? What if people lost interest? What if this had all been luck? Her fingers hesitated over the keys, unsure. The joy she had once felt while playing was replaced with nervousness. She stopped after a few minutes, frustrated. The next few days were a blur. Every hour the numbers grew. More likes, more comments, more followers. News pages started sharing short clips of her song, calling it a melody that speaks from the soul. A few reporters even sent emails asking for interviews, but she ignored them. She didn't want to be on camera. She didn't even know how to talk about herself without feeling awkward. Her mother, meanwhile, noticed something strange. One evening when Elena came home, her mother was holding her phone, smiling. "Look," she said, showing her a video on social media. It was her song. Elena's heart stopped. "People are talking about this everywhere," her mother said excitedly. "It says the pianist hasn't revealed her name yet. Can you believe something so beautiful came from someone so young?" She sighed and shook her head in wonder. "Music like this, it feels like love." Elena didn't say anything. She just smiled weakly and went to her room. She closed the door, sat down by the piano, and let out a small laugh that turned into tears. Her mother didn't even know it was her song. Later that night, she couldn't help but think, maybe this was her chance. Maybe this was the sign she had been waiting for. She decided to post again, but this time with a small message. On the same form where it all began, she wrote, "Thank you to everyone who listened. I never thought something so personal would reach so many people. I don't have much, but I have music, and I'm grateful it found you." She signed it with just her first name, Elena. By the next morning, people had already found her. They started tagging her, sharing her message, calling her the modest pianist. Comments flooded in. "We finally found her. Thank you for giving us this gift. Please make more." It was overwhelming, but this time she smiled. One day when she arrived at the cafe, the old music teacher was waiting for her at the counter. He was holding his phone. "You didn't tell me," he said with a proud grin. Elena's face turned red. You saw it? Of course, he chuckled. Half the city has seen it by now. I knew you had something special. She looked down shyly. It doesn't feel real, she said. It is real, he replied gently. The world finally heard what you've been hiding all along. Don't run from it. Share more. Play for them. Those words sank deep into her heart. That night she tried again. She sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and started playing. Not to impress, but to feel again. Slowly, the fear faded, replaced by the same peace she had always felt when she was alone with her music. The melody that came out that night was soft and uncertain at first, but soon it grew stronger. She didn't record it, didn't even give it a name. It was just for herself. A reminder that the reason she played wasn't for fame or numbers, but for the connection it created. Still, messages kept coming. Some people shared stories of how her song helped them through grief or sadness. One woman wrote, I listened to your song while my baby slept in the hospital. It gave me strength. Another said, I lost my mother years ago, but your song made me feel like she was near me again. Elena read every message with tears in her eyes. She realized that what she had created was more than just a song. It was a piece of her heart that had somehow touched others. Her family eventually found out. Her mother discovered her name in an online article and came rushing to her room one evening. Elena, is this true? This song, it's yours? Elena looked up from the piano, nervous. Yes, she whispered. Her mother stood there, speechless for a moment, then walked over and hugged her tightly. You wrote it for me? Yes, her mother pulled back, eyes shining. You've made me proud, my girl. You've given something beautiful to the world. It was the first time Elena had ever heard those words. She couldn't stop crying. In the following weeks, small music pages and even local radio stations started playing For You, Mama. Listeners called in to say how much they loved it. Someone even invited her to perform at a local community event. At first, she hesitated. She had never played in front of a crowd before. Her hands would shake even thinking about it. But then she remembered the old teacher's words, don't run from it. So she said yes. She practiced every night after work, carefully rehearsing each note. Her piano wasn't perfect, but she didn't care. When the day finally came, she wore a simple white dress her mother had sewn for her years ago. As she walked onto the small stage, the lights felt too bright and the audience too big. But then she looked down at the keys, her old familiar friends, Mau, and began to play. The hall went silent. Every note filled the air with warmth and emotion. Some people closed their eyes, others wiped tears. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. For the first time, Elena smiled on stage. She bowed gently, and for a moment she didn't feel small or invisible. She felt seen, heard, and understood. That night, after everyone had left, she sat alone at the piano and whispered, thank you. Not to the crowd, not even to herself, but to the music that had carried her through all the years of silence. She knew this was just the beginning. After that first small performance, Elena's life slowly began to change. It wasn't sudden fame or money. It was something quieter, but more meaningful. Wherever she went, people recognized her as the girl who played that song. Sometimes strangers would stop her at the cafe and say, your music helped me through a hard time. Others would simply smile and thank her. At first, she didn't know how to react. She wasn't used to attention. For years, she had lived in silence, blending into the background. Now people wanted to talk to her, to know her story, to hear more of her songs. But even as her name started spreading, Elena remained the same. She still woke up early, helped her mother in the bakery, and worked part-time at the cafe. She still came home in the evenings to sit by her piano. Her room was the same small space, the same cracked wall paint, the same broken key on the piano. But now when she looked at it, she didn't see a broken life. She saw where everything had begun. Her song, For You, Mama, kept traveling farther than she could ever imagine. A radio host from another city called to say that listeners had requested it dozens of times. A small TV channel even made a short story about her, showing clips of her playing. People loved that she wasn't a celebrity. She was just a regular girl with a piano and a heart full of emotion. Despite all the attention, Elena tried to stay grounded. Fame wasn't her goal. What made her happiest were the messages from people who said her song made them feel less alone. Some wrote that they had played it at their weddings, others at memorials for loved ones. Her simple melody had become a part of their lives, their memories, their healing. Still, fame brought new challenges. There were days when she felt pressure to keep creating. People expected her next song to be even better. But inspiration doesn't come on command. Some nights she sat at the piano for hours and couldn't find a single note that felt right. She'd sigh, rest her head on her hands, and whisper to herself, "Maybe I was just lucky once," but then she would remember the old teacher's words, "Don't be afraid to let people hear what you feel." So she stopped chasing perfection. She began playing again, not for others, but for herself. And slowly, new melodies started to come back. One evening, she was invited to perform at a small music event in the city. It wasn't a big concert, just a gathering of musicians and music lovers who wanted to hear her play live. At first, she wanted to refuse. She still got nervous around crowds. But her mother encouraged her. "You don't have to be perfect," her mother said softly. "Just be you. That's what people love." So she agreed. The night of the event, she wore a simple dress and tied her hair back the way she always did. She didn't have a fancy look, but there was something graceful about her simplicity. When she stepped onto the stage, the audience clapped warmly. She smiled shyly and sat down at the piano. As soon as her fingers touched the keys, the noise in the room faded away. She started playing "For You, Mama." Every note filled the air with warmth and tenderness. Some people in the crowd closed their eyes. Others quietly wiped tears. When she finished, there was a long silence before the applause erupted. That performance was recorded by someone in the audience, and within days, the video spread all over social media. Comments poured in. People called her the soul pianist, the modest girl with golden hands, the voice of emotion. Elena couldn't believe it. She had never asked for fame, yet it had found her again. But this time she wasn't afraid. She felt ready to share more. She started composing little pieces every week, small melodies inspired by daily life. One was based on the sound of rain on her window. Another came from the laughter of children outside her building. She posted them online with short captions like, "A rainy afternoon," or "Memories that don't fade." People loved the simplicity. They said her music didn't need word and it spoke directly to the heart. But not everyone understood her quiet success. Some people at her work started gossiping. They said things like, "If she's so famous, why is she still working here?" Or maybe she's not really that talented. She just got lucky once. Elena heard their whispers, but she never answered. She knew what she was doing was not about fame or money. It was about connection. Music had saved her when no one noticed her. Now she wanted to give that same comfort to others. Still, there were nights when doubt crept in. Sometimes she'd wake up at 2 a.m., wondering if she was really good enough. She'd sit at her piano and play softly in the dark until her mind calmed down. One rainy night, she received an email that made her heart race. It was from a well-known composer who had seen her performance online. He wrote, "Your music carries truth. It would be an honor to work with you." Elena read the message again and again, hardly believing it. Someone she had admired from afar was now reaching out to her. She showed it to her mother, who cried and said, "See, my child? The world finally sees what I've always known." A week later, Elena met the composer in a small studio downtown. It was her first time in a real recording space, surrounded by microphones, cables, and big speakers. She felt nervous, her hands trembling slightly. The composer smiled kindly. "Don't worry about perfection," he told her. "Just play from your heart the way you always do." So she did. When she began to play, the room filled with that same pure, honest emotion that had first captured people's hearts. When she finished, there was silence. Then, the composer nodded slowly and said, "This is what music should feel like." They decided to record her first official single together, a simple piano piece inspired by hope and new beginnings. It wasn't fancy or complex, but it carried her signature, sincerity. When it was released, it went viral again. People called it "The Sound of Peace." Videos started appearing online of people studying, painting, or resting while her music played in the background. But what touched Elena most were the personal messages. One man wrote, "Your song helped me through my darkest days." Another said, "I play your music for my daughter every night before bed. It calms her." Every message reminded her why she started, not to be famous, but to make people feel understood. Her small apartment didn't change much. She still lived above the bakery, still heard the hum of the oven below, still practiced on her old piano. But now her world felt wider. Her melodies traveled far beyond the walls of that room. Her father, who rarely showed emotion, began telling his friends proudly, "My daughter, she's the one who made that song everyone's talking about." Her mother would laugh and say, "She still forgets to eat when she's composing." Life wasn't perfect, but it was fuller. For the first time, Elena could dream without fear. Yet deep down, she stayed humble. Whenever people called her talented or brilliant, she'd simply smile and say, "I just play what I feel." As weeks passed, she received another invitation, and this time, to perform at a music festival in a different city. It was a bigger stage, a larger crowd. She hesitated again, nervous about facing so many people. But she reminded herself how far she had come. The night of the festival, she walked onto the stage, surrounded by bright lights. The audience was quiet, waiting. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and played. The music flowed effortlessly. It was not about notes anymore. It was about emotion, about her journey, about the little girl who once played alone in the dark. When the final note faded, the crowd stood and clapped endlessly. Some shouted her name, others cried. Elena smiled through tears. She finally understood that what truly mattered wasn't how many people listened. It was that her heart had been heard. When she returned home after the festival, she sat by her piano once again. The bakery downstairs was still warm, her mother still humming in the kitchen, and life went on as always. She placed her hands on the piano and whispered, "Thank you for never leaving me." Then she began to play again, softly, peacefully, the way she always had. Not for fame, not for praise, but simply because music was who she was, and once again the world listened. The morning after the festival, the city felt quiet. The noise, the clapping, the lights, all of it was gone, leaving behind only the memory of that magical night. Elena sat by her window sipping tea, watching sunlight spill across the street below. For the first time in a long while, she felt calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from peace. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from people, invitations from music studios, requests for interviews, all waiting for her reply. But she didn't open them right away. She just sat there, thinking about everything that had happened in the last few months. It all started in her small room, with an old piano and one simple song. And now somehow that song had changed her life. She still couldn't fully believe it. When her mother came in carrying breakfast, she smiled warmly. "You looked so beautiful up there yesterday," she said, setting the plate down. "Your father couldn't stop talking about it." Elena laughed softly. "I almost fainted from nervousness," she admitted. Her mother shook her head. "You didn't look nervous. You looked free." That word stayed with her. Free. For years, she had been trapped in her own doubts, hiding her music out of fear that no one would care. But now she finally felt seen, not as someone famous, not as a star, but as a person who had found her voice. In the following weeks, her life became a little busier. She was invited to different cities to perform. Each time she stepped onto a stage, the crowd would fall silent as soon as she started playing. No matter how big the hall was, the sound of her piano made it feel intimate, personal, like every listener was sitting in that small bakery apartment with her. But Elena never let the attention change her. She still returned home after every performance. She still helped her mother in the kitchen, still bought bread from the shop downstairs, still played the same piano she had since childhood. Her old teacher from the cafe came to visit one day. He was walking with a cane now, but still had the same warm smile. "So," he said proudly, "you've become quite the star." She shook her head quickly. "No, I'm still learning," she said, blushing. He chuckled. "Good. That's what keeps a musician alive. The feeling that there's always more to learn." They sat together for a while, and he listened as she played him one of her new songs. When she finished, he looked at her quietly for a moment, then said, "You know, when I first heard you hum at the cafe, I felt something rare. I'm glad the world can hear it now, too." His words touched her deeply. She never forgot how he had encouraged her when no one else had noticed. As months passed, Elena's music continued to reach new places. One of her pieces was used in a short film. Another became part of a commercial that showed scenes of kindness, people helping each other, laughing, living. Everywhere she went, she would hear her own melodies playing softly in the background, in shops, in taxis, even on radio shows. It was strange but beautiful. However, fame also brought its challenges. She received offers from big music companies who wanted to polish her style, to make her songs more commercial. They offered money, fancy studios, and fame, but they also wanted control over her work. Elena thought long and hard about it. She appreciated the offers, but something about them didn't feel right. Her music had always come from her heart, not from a formula. So she politely refused. Some people called her foolish. "You're throwing away big opportunities," they said. But Elena didn't care. She knew what she wanted, to make music that was honest. Music that sounded like life with all its imperfections. One evening, she sat alone at her piano, thinking about everything she had learned. The lights from the city glowed softly through her window. She pressed a few keys, letting the sound fill the room. The melody that came out was different this time, lighter yet full of emotion. It carried a feeling of gratitude. She began to record it. She didn't even have a title for it at first. It was just something that came from deep inside, a reflection of her journey, her struggles, her gratitude for every person who had believed in her. When she posted it online later, she simply wrote, "For those who listened when I was silent." Within hours, the comments started flooding in again. People said it felt like a song of hope, like a sunrise after a long night. Some said they played it every morning before work, to remind themselves to keep going. Others said it made them cry in a good way. Elena smiled when she read those messages. This was all she had ever wanted, for her music to bring comfort to others. The same way it had comforted her one day. She was invited to play at a charity concert to support children who wanted to learn music, but couldn't afford it. The idea touched her heart deeply because she had once been one of those children. The concert was held in a beautiful hall, with hundreds of people in the audience. But Elena didn't see it as a performance. She saw it as a thank you to music itself for never leaving her side. When she stepped onto the stage that night, she didn't wear anything fancy. Just a simple dress and her usual calm smile. The lights dimmed and silence filled the room. She began to play "For You, Mama" again, the song that had started everything. As the first notes rang out, her eyes filled with tears. Memories came rushing back. Her mother's tired hands, the smell of bread from the bakery, the sound of rain on the window, her old teacher's kind words. Every moment that had shaped her life was inside that melody. By the time she reached the final note, there wasn't a single dry eye in the hall. The audience stood up, clapping and cheering, but Elena simply bowed with a small, humble smile. She didn't need applause to know what that moment meant. After the concert, a little girl came up to her backstage clutching a small notebook. "I want to play like you someday," she said shyly. Elena knelt down and smiled. "Then promise me one thing," she said gently. "Don't play to be perfect. Play to be honest. Let your heart speak. That's what makes music beautiful." The girl nodded seriously, and Elena could see a spark in her eyes. The same spark she had once carried as a child watching a man play piano in the park. That night, when she returned home, the city was quiet again. Her mother had fallen asleep on the couch and the bakery downstairs had closed for the night. Elena changed into her pajamas and sat at her piano one more time. She touched the keys softly, letting her fingers wander without thought. The sound filled the small room, gentle and warm. She wasn't recording. She wasn't performing. She was just playing for herself the way she always had. The walls of the little apartment seemed to glow with the music. The same piano that had once been old and forgotten now felt alive, carrying years of stories and emotions within its keys. When she finally stopped, she sat in silence for a long time. Then she looked up at the sky through the window, where a few stars still shimmered faintly. She whispered quietly, "Thank you for everything." And somewhere far away in homes and hearts around the world, her music kept playing, soothing, healing, reminding people that even the quietest voice can touch countless lives. Elena never saw herself as a star. She remained the same modest pianist who played not for fame but for feeling, but the world remembered her differently, as the girl who taught everyone that even in the smallest places beauty can bloom. That sometimes one honest song can change everything, and so, night after night, As the city slept and the bakery below grew silent, the sound of her piano would rise once more, soft, pure, full of heart, carrying her story into the hearts of those still waiting to believe in their own.